Right now I'm going to say something that I have never said before in my life. Today I am very excited to be going to New York's JFK Airport. On June 25th, just under 2 weeks ago, Delta opened a brand new space at their New York hub. I wasn't able to be there for the grand opening as my schedule was already busy that day, but I was able to get there this past week and check it out. Welcome to Terminal 4 at New York's JFK Airport, home to Delta and most of their SkyTeam partners along with a couple of random others. The first part of the curb is one of the few remaining SkyCap services, where you can check your bags curbside without having to lug everything inside and into the queue. The first door is for Delta One and Sky Priority passengers, or basically any business class or premium economy passengers, as well as people with status from a SkyTeam airline. This area is shared by both Delta and Virgin Atlantic. Once inside, we see the first new addition to Delta's premium spaces. The private enclosure is specifically for Delta One and Virgin Atlantic upper-class passengers. Before this space existed, there was just a specific hall of desks for Sky Priority passengers. This still applies to the non-business class Sky Priority passengers, but we get to use this special area for our flight today, since we'll be traveling in Delta One from New York out to Dakar, Senegal. They searched my name in the database for entrance, which returned 0 results, weirdly enough. I was able to get in showing them my confirmation email and got to see the decor directly inside. I find it kind of funny having a chair and books, since it's really just a space to look at briefly and then keep walking. This pathway wasn't always enclosed, but it did exist previously. Last year, when I flew Delta One for the first time out of JFK, I checked in at the same counters and it looked roughly the same. Or at least the counters did. The rest of this space is completely different. Now we see spaces to relax for a moment. There was hot towels, there was all kinds of drinks, even some snacks. I'll just say that I've never wanted to hang out in a check-in area like I did at this moment. Now this fall, there's one more piece that will be added. Popping out the back of the Delta One check-in, we see the security checkpoint. Immediately outside is the known crew member checkpoint, and to the left is the rest of the security entrances. It sounds like the plan is to turn the KCM checkpoint into a checkpoint for Delta One passengers. This is because the lounge is directly across from here, and this checkpoint would create a seamless connection directly from the check-in area to the brand new Delta One lounge via the walk bridge, so you never have to mingle with anyone else in that terminal. Through the current security checkpoint, there's 2 ways to enter the lounge. For passengers originating in New York, after security, take a right and go down to the entrance. For connecting passengers, there's an easier entrance from down below in the concourse of Terminal 4 between the A and B gates. Here's the problem. I went to the lounge right away and was told they were at capacity, and therefore I'd have to wait outside the door until they had space. There was a line upstairs and a group of people downstairs being let in one at a time. This was super disappointing, as I know lounges get crowded in the late afternoons, but I've never been told to wait when holding a business class ticket at a business class lounge. Eventually I got in, went up the escalator, and was off into the brand new 40,000 square foot lounge space, making it the largest lounge in Delta history. With a flagship business class known as Delta One, Delta has built up the brand on board, but the airport experience was always lacking compared to other US carriers. United, for example, has their Polaris business class and the corresponding Polaris lounge. American Airlines has flagship business class and flagship lounges. Up until now, Delta has had Delta One, but still only used the Delta Sky Clubs. It would be like United using the United Clubs or American using the Admirals Clubs for long-haul passengers. The addition of this space gives a flagship location for passengers to really begin their journey right. Right on entering, we were given a couple cards. The first one explained the amenities available to each passenger. There was a number of bookable experiences to take advantage of, either on your personal device with a QR code or one of the many kiosks around the lounge. We also got a card with all the art around the lounge because, as you'll see, there's absolutely no shortage of art throughout the lounge. There's a main hallway on either side of the lounge as we pass by a number of spaces. There's a few main sections of the lounge as we continue, first being the lounging area. We see an area with fireplace and bookshelves. This space was directly inside the entrance, so therefore was definitely the most crowded. For some privacy, I'd suggest going a little bit deeper into the lounge. This, however, is potentially the room they're most proud of. We'll talk a little bit more about how they chose the decor that went into this space. If you do a 180, you'll see the bar area. This space has handcrafted drinks and more seats with more charging ports at every seat, like multiple ports at each seat. The bar, by the way, has a great assortment of alcohols ranging all the way up to $425 for Remy Martin Louis Cognac or $450 for their best wines and champagnes. These things can also be purchased with your Delta Sky Miles, using $42,500 for that cognac or $45,000 for those wines. They're the only things in the lounge that actually cost more money on top of the cost of your ticket, such as these drink carts around the lounge, each with an attendant to prepare a beverage. Across from that is a major dining room, a 140-seat brasserie. Much like Polaris's dining rooms or American's flagship dining, you can also sit solo or with a group to get a meal for free with your business class ticket. The main difference? Delta partnered with local culinary experts to create excellent handcrafted 3-course meal choices. I mean, where else at an airport would you find steak tartare and hamachi crudo? Between that and the setting of the restaurant, it isn't hard to forget that you're at an airport and not some swanky place in the Upper East Side. Honestly, typically lounge food isn't that bad, but it definitely wasn't something you'd seek out. Delta has created food options that I would actually look forward to eating. That being said, if you do want something simpler, a little further down is the walk-up dining options. There's a few different sections to pick some food up from. One is known as the Market, which has things from pizza to chicken. The next is the Bakery and has not only dessert but also pastries and charcuterie. Lastly is a salad bar. My favorite part about all this is that it might be walk-up dining to be done at your own pace, but it's more of an attended buffet where you go to the counters and request the items you'd like, and they will plate it for you, making it more luxurious and personal than the other Sky Clubs. Then you can take that and go sit in one of the many tables or booths adjacent to the buffet. I'm gonna be honest, it seems like at least half the lounge space is just dining areas. Behind the dining area is a workspace. There's a few different setups for places to work. They have a collection of solo workspaces near the window. They also have a large communal workspace around the table in the center. Perhaps the most important, however, is these framery work booths. Completely soundproof and with lots of charging ports. We actually see these in a couple places for a total of 8 soundproof booths, the other being over by the elevators and adjacent to work counters that are a bit more open. They also offer 15-inch permanent monitors to plug into, which plugs into Mac, Windows, and select iOS devices. Just past the buffet is one of the best perks of the lounge. First off, of course, there's more seating, but past that is the rejuvenating spa. And it ain't like any normal spa. They say there's a spa and you may think there's a few chairs, and there is, but it's more of a full wellness area with a menu of massages and facials. Inside the wellness area, which I didn't bring my camera into for the privacy of the people in there, is 9 reservable relaxation pods. These are small spaces with privacy curtains, zero-gravity massage chairs, and reclining chairs for rest. Upon request, you can also get massage guns and compression boots, and that's on top of the therapist that can give you a treatment before your flight. That's not even the best part, however. To go on from there, there's also a cart that comes around with options like spa water, which is really just a fancy name for infused water, refreshing towels, non-alcoholic wellness drinks, and health-conscious snacks. Perhaps one of my favorite parts, though, is that in the lobby of this relaxation area is a quiet area with lighting set to encourage your circadian rhythm and help reduce jet lag. So basically, all the spa treatments that one would normally get in the city, you can now get in the airport, allowing you to get on the flight with maximum relaxation. Around the corner from the spa is yet again some more seating and solo workspaces, but also where we find the showers. Remember that we can sign up using the QR code at the kiosk, which I did. You can see here that it put my name on the list for a suite, and I could keep tabs on the progress while I got work done, since once they text you, you've got 5 minutes to show up. Check out these shower suites. They've got 8 of these things, and when they assigned my shower, they said, "Oh, you got the best one," which I can't tell if they were serious about or not. Regardless, this space is a pretty good size with all the spaces you could need. We also got amenities like slippers, Grown Alchemist products, and literally the softest robe I've ever felt. Not to mention there was a closet where you can get a complimentary shoe shining and clothes steaming while you shower. We also can ask for any of these amenities from the front desk, which they do so they don't have to replace them as often. Then I opened the shower door and realized the shower was damn near the same size as the rest of the suite. Like, if we're being real, what would someone even use all this space for? I also wanted to enjoy the outdoor patio after that. Most of the Delta Sky Clubs have sky decks, which are nice outdoor patios, but not quite as complete as this. Here we've got an oasis-like escape with seasonally updated plants and a retractable roof, combined with heat and AC, making the space usable 365 days a year. Not to mention that they've got the same drink cart to keep you hydrated in any space at the lounge. The only thing I'll say against the lounge is the views. There are great views of the ramp, but you'll notice that every window has a tint and dots. These help with cooling significantly, but they aren't as great for photos. Lastly, I had to check out the incredible sit-down restaurant that everyone had been raving about. I got a table for one and ordered my starter, main course, and dessert to complete my 3-course meal. Perhaps the most impressive part was when they asked me upon seating when I was boarding and if I was in a hurry. For beginners, I got a mezcal cocktail and a plate of mussels. I mean, seriously, how often are you eating 5-star mussels in an airport? Then I went with their signature burger for the main course, which was cooked to perfection and an excellent subtle cheesiness. And the Delta One logo branded on top of the burger, of course. To wrap it up, I was recommended the souffle multiple times, so I had to give it a go. Somehow, the perfect mix of chocolate and vanilla. It was absolutely amazing. A great way to end the meal here. This lounge took some serious time to envision and complete, and it shows in the details. The entire lounge took inspiration from Manhattan and the rest of New York City. We see examples such as the Art Deco bar, with a ceiling curvature and lighting that's meant to be modeled after the famous Radio City. We see white marble counters at the market, bakery, and salad bar, which is supposed to be a nod to the old-time local delis. The fan tiles on the ground in the dining area are a tribute to the city's brasseries. The penny round ceiling over the food counters are modeled after the original JFK terminal, and the dining room lighting was designed in an overlapping pattern to resemble the Brooklyn Bridge supports. In addition, they partnered with Missoni, the Italian luxury home, to provide interior designing like the pillows, vases, and books, like in the room with the fireplace and bookshelves we see here. The only problem is that we can't see all those details, but that's a whole thing we'll get into later. Remember that Delta has 2 sky clubs on top of this new lounge. They've got the B Gate Lounge, which is bigger but older, and the A Gate Lounge, which is smaller but nicer. We covered both of these in last year's video in my series The Ones in Delta One on Delta Flight Number 1 from here to Heathrow. This lounge does offer a 6-person golf cart service to the lounge at Gate B31 every 15 minutes, which helps people reach the other lounge if this one's too crowded, but also a way to get halfway down the B gates, which seem to go on forever. Now, the biggest thing with these business class lounges is the access. For the new Delta One lounges, they've laid out very strict rules. Essentially, the invite-only Delta 360 members get access with any first-class ticket, plus a Porsche chauffeur from the lounge to the plane directly via an elevator that takes them down to the tarmac. Other than that, however, you must be holding a business or first-class ticket with Korean Air, Air France, Virgin Atlantic, or LATAM. Third, and lastly, of course, is departing Delta One passengers. The only thing is that Delta One doesn't apply to everyone. It will explicitly say Delta One on booking, but essentially intercontinental business class, or flights from New York to San Francisco, Los Angeles, and Honolulu, all of which is nearly identical to United's Polaris Lounge and American's flagship lounges. They've also said that you can't get access if you're still awaiting an upgrade to Delta One, and there will be no day passes, despite still being able to get these for the normal Delta Sky Clubs. By the time I got to the gate, they had queued up all the pre-boarders, so I waited nearby for Group 1 boarding, which is given to all Delta One passengers. I'm not sure if it's because of this gate, or maybe this aircraft, but everyone boarded through the first door, meaning that they all had to pass through the business class cabin, which is probably why they waited so long to board Group 1. I will say, however, that pre-boarding is for families and people needing assistance getting on board, and I'm not even exaggerating when I say that half the flight must have been pre-boarding. It seemed as if everyone was traveling as a family with kids, so by the time we got on board, there was probably 50 to 100 people on board already. No matter, because the lounge was honestly the main meat of the video. Now, when it comes to Delta One's onboard product, there's one specific issue I have with it, and I've mentioned it before, but it's the inconsistency. Each aircraft has a different product. This compared to United, for example, which has the same Polaris seat on all long-haul aircraft. Previously, I flew Delta's A330-300 and stated it was my least favorite of their Delta One cabins. This, however, is my first time on the 767-300, and I honestly think this cabin makes the A330 feel like Emirates. This is for a couple of major reasons. First off, what in the lack of privacy is going on here? Even the seats closer to the windows are almost completely exposed to the rest of the cabin. Everyone in the cabin can see everyone else, even when sleeping. The other reason I dislike the cabin is because the 767-300 just feels too small for a 1-2-1 setup. I mentioned United's Polaris earlier, and on their 767-300s they've used a 1-1-1 setup, allowing for everyone to have sufficient space, and honestly, a 1-2-1 configuration just feels cramped. It just felt like my knees were always wedged against something, and the seat height was so low that I spent the whole flight looking at the dude in front of me's head. I know it sounds stupid to complain about these things when there's people crammed behind me in economy, but if we're just comparing it with its competition, it is something to think about. Now let's take a quick speed run around this seat, however, which features the signature Delta One seat cushion. It looks great, it's just firm as hell. The little armrest is narrow and hard, so it kind of digs into your elbow, and if you put your arm inside of it, it's just super tight. At least there's 3 windows at the seat though. In front of us is a seat back pocket and a TV, but like an old TV. This thing is definitely from a different era of seatback entertainment. Below that is the footrest, which just felt narrow the whole time. There is a little pocket I found later on down there, which fits the shoes in flight, however. There's another pocket on the front of the counter, and then up on the counter we see the design that I called a prism last time, but was corrected by one of y'all saying it was a Delta, of course. But there was a good amount of space up here, just some weird cracks and discontinuation in the design. Although one of them was the flap with a remote that I didn't find until much later in the flight. The buttons for the seat controls were on the front of the counter, and they weren't all the most intuitive, but I figured it out quickly enough. The weirdest part was definitely the unique table setup. The table button opens a flap which exposes the table underneath, which then folds out, and then the flap can snap back into place. And then up above the counter is the plugs for the charging and headsets. Fortunately, these old airplanes have overhead air vents. Unfortunately, the cabin has changed since they were first installed, so it's in a weird place, kinda coming from behind me. But hey, the look is kind of a blast to the past. We got a few amenities like the normal pillow and blanket in the big baggie here. The blanket is cozy but fairly thin, and the pillow is large and soft. We did get a nice glass of weirdly light sparkling wine to go with the water bottle at the seat. We did get a pair of slippers, along with a pair of headphones with not the best noise cancelling. Now there's no hook for the headset at the seats, but the ingenious of the crew decided to hang it on the light over the shoulder. Then was the amenity kits, which have these fun designs from Oaxaca, Mexico, even though the contents are a bit disappointingly boring. I do like the Grown Alchemist lotions, however. Delta has long had a problem with overcrowding in their lounge network. At pretty much every hub, and even busier outstations. Unless you're on a business class ticket, you'll be waiting in a queue outside. Regardless, it's always a fight for seats once you do get inside. The first day, it looks like they had some great staging set up to present this new lounge, but in the days since then, there's been an endless stream of complaints of overcrowding already. Essentially, most people are saying that it is gorgeous, but the overcrowding takes away from all that. Even this time, we were told to wait outside, making it the first time I've ever been told to wait outside with a business class ticket in hand. Luckily, I was downstairs, considering that upstairs had a legit line, at a flagship lounge for business class passengers. There was definitely people predicting the overcrowding before it opened, and those same people are all over Twitter now claiming their win. I will say that one of the biggest problems in my opinion is all the photos and touting that was done prior to the opening when it was empty, but there was no way to visualize it at peak operation, which set some interesting expectations. I mean, seriously, look at some of the pictures of these spaces from Delta's posts and what it actually looked like today. Here is the fireplace room that they were extra proud of with the Masoni decor, and here is what it looked like today. Here is the outdoor patio with plants and cooling and all, and here is what it looked like today. Here's the dining room with all the local inspirations, and here it is today when you can barely even see those touches. Here's the bar with a similar type of local inspiration, and following the same theme, it's much harder to even detect it here today. Here's the buffet area with the market and bakery, and this is what it looked like as people come through and pick through it. Now obviously lounges get crowded. It's not really all that surprising or even any different than any other airline's flagship lounge. I think that it just makes it a bit more anticlimactic given all the hype and sheer size of this space. It's not like they can do anything else about it. There's so many people originating in New York that it wouldn't make sense to route people through connections. It's mostly just that for the busiest time of day, this is just the reality of it. And with 3 lounges now in Terminal 4, I doubt we see any additional spaces. The space isn't the only thing, although it does go hand in hand with my other thought, which was just how loud it was. Sitting in most areas, you had to talk at an elevated level just to be heard. I do also feel like they may need to adjust the staffing levels. I'm sure we're in that awkward adjustment phase, but my water glass was empty for an hour in the restaurant and never got filled despite 2 waiters saying they'd get it for me. My favorite lounge in the US is United's Polaris Lounge in San Francisco, and even at its busiest time, it never gets this loud or crowded. I will say that the B-Gate Sky Club is just as crowded, but even today, at this time, the A-Gate Sky Club had tons of space. So maybe that's the hack if you want some more peace and quiet. I feel like after that whole rant, I've just made myself come across as snobby and annoying, but I really do seriously enjoy this lounge. I think it's the new best lounge in the US and up there amongst the world's best. I would say that it's still better than flying private with the lounge's amenities, spas, and multi-course meals, plus that Porsche chauffeur directly across the tarmac to your airplane if you do reach the highest status with Delta. So honestly, I'll treat this one as their first attempt, and stand by for now as we wait for the next 2 locations, which should be open in Boston and Los Angeles by the end of the year, although I've gotta say it's strange that there's no official plans for some of their largest hubs, especially Atlanta, making me think they're putting direct competition ahead of their largest loyalty bases. It was interesting looking through the menu to see what options they had. When I flew the Taipei inaugural last month with Delta, I mentioned that I was surprised they had already began running out of meal choices by the 4th row. Everyone gave me crap for not pre-ordering, so this time I did that, only to be told that the selections weren't actually loaded. Regardless, with a flight under 8 hours, we will definitely get a full dinner after departure and a small breakfast before arrival. They did have one or two dishes that used West African influence, leading me to wonder if they used the same menus for Accra and Lagos as well. It was also interesting looking through the entertainment. That's because I was looking at this wildly outdated screen wondering what the interface would be like. On United 767s, the screens are too old for the current interface, so they have an old system in use on those aircraft specifically. What I found is there's a couple things that look different, but it does seem to have most, if not all, of the same selection as the more modern screens, with the exception of the map, which just flicks through a preset of pages. Although we did get the special Team USA plane on our map to show the partnership of Delta and Team USA as we approach the Paris Olympics. It is worth noting that you couldn't hit anything on the edge of the screen, meaning I couldn't scroll, so I watched 2 programs on the first page before finally finding that remote. The one big thing, however, on every long-haul Delta flight I've had this year, the Wi-Fi has been inoperative. It doesn't matter what type of aircraft, I've gotten that same email the day before check-in. They wasted no time with the meal getting out, starting with nuts and a choice of beverage. Then the starters, which included a few things like tuna tataki, celeriac and truffle soup, mixed green salad with carrots and radish, and some sourdough bread. I thought the quality of these starters were excellent. I just missed the fun salt and pepper shakers from the Taipei flight. This one's much more basic than that jet engine looking thing. For the main course, I chose the African option. When in Rome, right? The dish was a honey harissa chicken thigh with jolly rice and stewed greens. Honestly, one of the better cooked chickens I've had on an airplane, a trend I've seen more and more recently. Dessert was a couple options, but of course we chose the sundae. The flight attendant said it made her life easier if I got every topping, so I went along with it and topped the vanilla ice cream with a cherry compote, chocolate sauce, Biscoff crumbs, and whipped cream. I was impressed, however, that even these old 767s still had the fun mood lighting to play with that could be dimmed slowly as they sent us to sleep and woke us up for breakfast. I did set up the bed, but the cabin was dark the whole flight, so you're basically just seeing what it looked like throughout the cabin as I was relaxing or sleeping. One of the biggest things, as mentioned earlier, is that lack of privacy. Even when reclined, we were still looking over the countertop and anyone walking by could see in effortlessly, and unless everyone was laying down, someone could always see your head sticking up. After some short rest, we were about 3 hours from Dakar, and although they did have snacks in the galley, I was still a bit full from dinner only a few hours ago. One thing I will say about these 30-year-old 767s is that they are as dry as the Mojave Desert multiplied by the Sahara Desert. So not only did I finish all the lotions I had, but after waking up, I chugged 2 bottles of water, easy money. Not to mention how difficult it was to have a good sleep with how dry the air was. The lavatories threw me off for a couple reasons. First off, they're actually a pretty good size, it's just that they're long but not wide. So when you're sitting on the toilet, your feet are against the door, but with a bunch of space next to you. The floor and lighting seemed renovated, but perhaps the best thing was a foot pedal for flushing and opening the trash can. We didn't actually get our breakfast until we were just under an hour from Senegal. In the meantime, however, I did enjoy watching our sunrise as we finished our Atlantic crossing. I also noticed some light seeping through the walls of the cabin. Not open windows, just the light shining through that plastic layer. And eventually the lights came up bit by bit, cabin by cabin, as we prepared for our breakfast before we arrived to Dakar. It may look a bit interesting, but for breakfast I chose the vanilla chia pudding with mixed berries and granola. It's an interesting texture if you aren't familiar with chia seeds, but honestly it was one of the more tasty breakfast options I've had, and it's always great to see a new option as opposed to the normal French toast or omelet, even if it does still come with a croissant and fruit cup, which I'm never one to turn down. Of course, I also got a tea to accompany it. And then our last service was this little chocolate they passed out. And for a brief change of topic, because at face value, Delta's service from New York to Dakar, Senegal seems a bit strange. In a little deeper of a dive, however, we can make some sense of it. The whole thing began back in 2006, when on December 5th, Delta launched their first African service from Atlanta to Johannesburg with a stopover in Dakar on the way, a flight that South African Airways was also running. This was kind of the plan going forward for Delta, as they wanted to use Dakar as a launch point for additional flights to places like Luanda, Nairobi, Monrovia, Abuja, and Malabo between 2008 and 2010, with Dakar acting as a regional hub of sorts. The only issue is that due to issues with Homeland Security and TSA, these routes never ended up starting. They did, however, launch service to Accra a week after Dakar, and Lagos the next year, all from Atlanta. United also looked into African growth during this time. They fly to Accra and Lagos, but they looked into Dakar and decided against it since South African Airways served that route and they could just code share that flight instead. In the 2010s, it became clear that Delta wouldn't be able to operate the Fifth Freedom routes that they had originally planned on using Dakar for. The only thing, they still had a chunk of passengers flying to Dakar specifically, but not from Atlanta, instead from New York. At this time, they opted to move the Dakar flights from Atlanta to New York. They also downgraded the aircraft from a 767-400 to a 757-200, a much better aircraft for low-demand routes like this one. Interestingly enough, the route was suspended for COVID, and when they returned, Delta opted not to return the 757s to any transatlantic routes. United did, but Delta opted in favor of the 767. When Dakar resumed in 2021, they placed the 767-300 on it, and it stayed that way, even though the 757 seems to be perfect. Why New York, though? There's roughly 20,000 Senegalese Americans, and about 90% of them live in New York, with small diasporas in Chicago, Oakland, and Atlanta. These Senegalese make up one of 4 major Muslim diasporas in New York, and even have a neighborhood known as Little Senegal in Harlem, where people from small villages in Senegal have settled due to sharing a similar culture and a population speaking the local language of Wolof, including translators in places like hospitals. This area and the nearby groups of Senegalese are a big reason why Delta is able to keep the route running, and still brought it back in a post-COVID world, even though Senegal is only Africa's 19th largest economy, and even though Dakar is the 25th most populated, it doesn't crack the top cities in wealth on the continent. I would say that maybe cargo keeps the route operating, although I noticed there was far more cargo being loaded on the plane to Dakar than on the flight back to New York. I guess Delta hasn't been tasked to transport Senegal's main exports of gold, phosphoric acid, fish, peanut oil, and refined petroleum. In a somewhat shocking move, Air Senegal decided to deploy one of its 2 A330neos on a US route as well. They began with service from Dakar to New York, continuing on to Baltimore. New York was for the Senegalese enclave, and Baltimore was for political reasons, but Baltimore instead of Dulles to save some costs. The Baltimore service was dropped in late 2022, but they still run their JFK route proudly, despite only a 67% load factor. At this time, Air Senegal runs the flight 2 times per week, and Delta operates theirs 2 to 3 times per week depending on the season, so I guess there's enough demand for 4 to 5 weekly flights, even if each flight has a good chunk of empty seats. It's worth noting that Air Senegal is currently operating the flight with a wet-leased A340 with much less premium space to try and fill more of the cabin. It is interesting to see that on a route as unique as New York to Dakar, we still have competition. Last year I posted a video of my Air Senegal flight from Dakar to New York featuring Akon. Air Senegal has 580 weekly seats and Delta with 680 weekly seats. Air Senegal, however, sells their business class for the same price that Delta sells their economy class, mostly because Air Senegal's passengers aren't connecting in New York, meaning they have a much higher African customer base. This route is a case study in a few ways, and I'm glad I've been able to try it in both directions and with both countries' airlines. So if you haven't seen last year's Air Senegal video, go watch that and let me know your preference. All I've got to say is it's about dang time. One of Delta's biggest critiques is that the Sky Clubs were for everyone, credit card holders, status members, day pass purchasers, and Delta One customers. Meanwhile, the other carriers in the US all created their own lounges just for long-haul business class passengers. It felt like Delta was falling behind, so these lounges coming out is the new best thing to happen to them. Not just that, but the lounge is incredible. This New York Delta One lounge has everything one could possibly need before a flight, but then takes it to the nth level. I do find it kinda strange that New York, Los Angeles, and Boston are their choices for the first locations. I'd assume Los Angeles and New York are strictly because of the prestige of those places and the competition in those airports. Boston, on the other hand, has seen Delta come in and put it in a stranglehold, trying to take a commanding control over the airport. JetBlue has been focusing on New York and the West Coast and transatlantic routes, and Delta saw the opportunity to sneak more of their influence into Boston. So a Delta One lounge would really give customers a reason to choose them, especially with JetBlue not having a lounge of any sorts. My question is about Atlanta. Not only is it Delta's largest hub, but it's also the largest airport in the world. Honestly, the fact Atlanta wasn't even mentioned as one of the original locations feels like the greatest snub since Barry Bonds was omitted from the MLB Hall of Fame. Cost-wise, I did want to compare the competition and their products. I decided to look at New York to Rome, a busy route served by all three major US carriers. United was the cheapest business class, then American, and then Delta was the most expensive. And that's not just a one-time thing. Delta One seems to be the most expensive on a fairly consistent basis. American's long-haul business class is probably the weakest on that route, with a lounge that ain't bad, but kind of boring herringbone seats on board. United has the Polaris lounge and cabin, and honestly, I'd take their cabin over Delta's. But now I'd take Delta's lounge over United's at this point. Just not at the price point. I mean, it was over $1,000 more for Delta as of looking this route up for the video, so you just gotta ask yourself, is it worth $1,000 to avoid Newark? That's up to you to decide. I, for one, am ecstatic to see what Delta has done with their space in New York, and I can't wait to see their next spaces. I just gotta find a better time of day to check it out. Let me know your thoughts for now, though, and until next Sunday, safe travels. I'll see y'all next time.